Ancient Egypt, land of pharaohs and priests. Conquered by Alexander the Great, his empire lasts until Cleopatra's death. But how did these invading Greeks take control of the religious Egyptians? The answer lies buried under the Mediterranean Sea. An immense temple city, lost for over 1,000 years, the legendary Heraklion. Using modern technology, underwater explorer Frank Gaudio discovers a temple city that was a weapon in the fight for Egypt. Lost Temple to the Gods. The Nile, gateway to Egypt's great empire. But time has been cruel here. Under the waves lie the homes of Cleopatra's subjects and ancestors. Their world literally sunken out of sight, lost to history, until now. An international team led by underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio has spent 6 seasons exploring these waters. It's one of the most ambitious underwater archaeological expeditions ever mounted. His divers have been mapping the ocean floor, and now a startling picture is beginning to emerge. Beneath his ship, Gaudio believes he's found a vast temple complex controlled by the invading Greeks 2,300 years ago. Ptolemy I was a general serving under the Macedonian Greek Alexander the Great. Together, they conquered the Egyptians in 332 BC. The glory of the pharaohs became the spoils of the Ptolemies. So began the Greek reign over Egypt that lasted until the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC. Frank Gaudio and his team are searching an area larger than Paris. It covers nearly half the Bay of Abu Qir, a 200-square-mile watery grave. Gaudio suspects he has found a key to the new Greek Empire 12 miles from its headquarters in Alexandria. It was from Alexandria that the Ptolemies extended their rule over Egypt. Named after Alexander the Great, the city became the seat of power for the Greek pharaohs. Known for its famous lighthouse and library, over 300 years it grew to a population of nearly 1 million people. But when the invaders first arrived, they found well-established coastal cities like Canopus and Heraklion. Ancient accounts tell of great temples and lavish festivals that lured Alexandria's rich and famous. They found priests and worshippers. Here, Greek generals confronted Egyptian superstition. But these cities disappeared without a trace. Gaudio believes they were destroyed by a natural disaster. Forces beyond the control of generals or priests. He suspects the remains of these cities are to be found beneath the waters of Abu Qir Bay. He joins forces with Egypt's underwater archaeology unit led by Ibrahim Darwish. The highly experienced team is an international mix, French, American, and Egyptian. Jean-Claude Roubaud is the lead diver and runs the underwater side of the operation. But the search is difficult, visibility is poor, and the search area is vast, hiding artifacts half buried in time and sand.
We were diving and seeing nothing remarkable underwater. It's only after a few days that we understood that these rocks protruding out of the sediment, covered with very thick concretion, were, as a matter of fact, part of statues.
They are bodies frozen in time and stone. For 2 millennia, part of the seafloor. Now, finally ready for their part in history. Using special airbags, the divers prepare to lift one of the mysterious fragments to an upright position. Visible under a layer of calcification, a face emerges.
These are the very first thing we found. They were broken into pieces, and you could see that the breaks were absolutely neat. They have been broken where we found them, and not a single piece was missing.
Piece by piece, not one, but 3 giant figures are uncovered. At 19 feet tall, the massive statues are difficult to analyze underwater. So, using digital technology, Gaudio creates a virtual lab where he can show them to Dr. Sally Ann Ashton.
These are absolutely amazing.
These are the first objects we found on the site. The queen, the king, and the god. It's a god Hapi.
And do you think that they were part of a group?
It looks like, because we found them together on the site.
They're incredibly interesting, not least of all because of their huge size. The queen and the god look as if they could date to an earlier period. Stylistically, you can see that they have very rounded, fleshy faces, and that's typical of the royal portraits from the 30th dynasty and also the early Ptolemaic period.
These royal statues confirm that Gaudio is diving on a site that was important to the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt.
We know that she's a queen because of her crown, and also because she has a cobra or a uraeus on her brow.
Yes.
If she was a goddess, she'd be wearing a vulture headdress. So she could be perhaps a representation of Berenike II, who was the wife of Ptolemy III. The king, on the other hand, is very, very different. If you look at his portrait features, you can see he has eyes that are very closely set together.
Yes.
And they're very wide, they almost look startled. Also, you may notice that whereas these two appear to be smiling, he has a downturned mouth. And that is typical of portraits from the later Ptolemaic period. So he stylistically looks like an image of Ptolemy VIII or one of Ptolemy VIII's sons, Ptolemy IX or X.
Ptolemy VIII, Cleopatra's great-grandfather, was the most notorious of the Greek rulers, infamous for his cruelty. His reign was characterized by strife and civil war.
So I wonder if what hasn't happened is that Ptolemy VIII or IX or perhaps even X came along and decided to dedicate a statue of himself with these two, perhaps even replacing an earlier statue of an earlier ruler. And he's put himself probably in the middle with two already existing statues. It's quite a cheap way of promoting yourself, and it also ties in very nicely with the policies of these particular rulers, because they tend to dedicate on sites that link them to the last Egyptian dynasty.
The statues show that the Greeks were experts at propaganda and publicity. Long before television, stone was the mass medium of choice for ambitious rulers. But the discoveries have just begun. Soon, Gaudio will find artifacts that will rewrite Egyptian history. Amongst a jumble of underwater ruins, Frank Gaudio has discovered 3 colossal statues. But are the statues proof that this is the legendary city of Heraklion? Ancient texts describe a famous temple here. For years, these accounts have intrigued Frank Gaudio and Egyptologist Dr. Robert Bianchi.
The first mention in the history of the temple is Herodotus, talking about the temple of Hercules. And Herodotus, from the 5th century BC, means that the city was very old. But something very strange is that Herodotus, in the mid-5th century BC, is talking about Queen Hélène and King Menelaus coming to the temple of Heraklion. And this goes back to the 12th century BC. Helena came here.
So almost every great Greek historian of every century talks about this magical place that's associated with these two wonderful heroes of Greek mythology, Helen of Troy, whose face launched 1,000 ships that started the Trojan War, and Hercules, the man who accomplished the 12 great labors. And in commemoration of the deed where Hercules rids the region of a tyrant, the region is then named after him, Heraklion, the city or the region of Hercules.
Heraklion. It would be a major find. Gaudio and his team use customized high-tech tools. Side-scan sonar, magnetometers, and depth sounders in their search for the lost temple city.
How do you actually go from the imagination of the literature to the actual site itself in this amazingly large area?
We define a survey area which is 12 kilometers long by 8 kilometers wide, and this is our survey area.
So it's an area about 8 miles by 5 miles, big enough to put Manhattan Island or the center of Paris.
Yes, and we knew from the text that we have to look in the western part of that bay, here.
Guided by satellites, the team starts by running east-west survey lines across the bay. The data is fed into a computerized map. The sunken landscape appears colored in yellow.
From that map, you can see that we were obviously on a vast portion of a sunken land.
Okay.
Here. East of this portion of land, over there, you can see that there is some clue of a sunken bed of the Nile.
And that's represented by this trough that we're looking at on the seafloor.
Yes.
The ancient canopic branch of the Nile has been lost for centuries. It was a vital lead in narrowing down the search for Heraklion.
But it was extremely important for us because we knew that at the mouth of the canopic branch of the Nile, there was, close to it, the city of Heraklion.
Armed with ancient clues, modern technology sets out to find Heraklion's location. These nuclear magnetometers show up tiny anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. Reading the data allows the team to locate fault lines that are often associated with large collapsed buildings like temples.
Over there, you see very bright colors, yes. And this means that you have a lot of magnetic activity in this central part over there. When you are finding such a magnetic activity, you have very good chance to find sunken monuments or structures there.
And so you use then that information to suggest that perhaps that's where you should dive and dig?
Yes, we had narrow and narrow and narrow the site. Now you have to dive.
The divers descend 30 feet to the bottom of the bay. The statues lie in the center of the target area. The first step, create a reference line for the grid so each artifact's location can be recorded. Now divers can start exploring, and Gaudio will know exactly where each discovery is made. And he won't be disappointed. The site is a treasure trove.
Little by little, we have discovered, of course, a lot of artifacts. One of the main features is this very important wall, 150 meters.
A wall 500 feet long that at one time belonged to an immense structure. If this is Heraklion, there should be a major temple here. And the divers find tantalizing clues, a bronze basin, and ladles. Gaudio believes these could have been used by temple priests. A decorated pail that could have held the daily offerings for the sanctuary. All of the objects are pointing towards the same exciting conclusion, that this has to be the site of a once great temple.
In that area there, we found 8 red granite sphinxes plus 2 beautiful black granite sphinx.
And some of those sphinxes have their tails curled in opposite directions, making us believe that they were mirror images of one another, as you find on a processional road that leads to an Egyptian temple.
Absolutely.
The sphinxes provide a critical clue to how the temple may have looked over 2,000 years ago.
So that if we step back for a moment, we can then suggest that we have the processional way lined with sphinxes, and if we work on the proportions of a 500-foot long wall. We're assuming then by proportion that the pylon might have been 100 feet high. And then what do you suggest might have been in front of the pylon then, based on the
We could have
remains?
maybe the very big statue.
The three colossal statues. We can begin to have an idea of what this temple looked like that is really ranking as one of the great large temples that we know from ancient Egypt.
When the Greeks invaded Egypt, they found a land of great temples inspiring awe and reverence. Each temple was a church, a billboard, and a propaganda machine, all rolled into one. The Greeks realized that to control the people, they needed to control the temples. Gaudio's discovery of an ancient temple complex is extraordinary. But one riddle remains, finding proof that it is the great temple of Heracleion. And ironically, it will be another discovery which solves the mystery. A small shrine that lies at the center of the mystery of Heracleion. In the waters of the Mediterranean, divers have found a gigantic temple, lost for over 1,000 years. But is it part of the legendary city of Heracleion? This 6-foot-high shrine may provide the answer. It once stood at the temple's heart. It's called a naos. Inscribed on its surface and barely legible is a god's name, Amun of the Gereb. In ancient Egypt, gods had homes on earth as well as in the heavens. This shrine was built to house the sacred power of Amun. At each dawn, at the precise moment the sun broke the horizon, the soul of the god Amun would be restored to its earthly home. And Amun was special. He was able to grant divine power to kings. This god could give the Greeks divine permission to rule Egypt. But did the Greeks use this temple, and was it in the lost city of Heracleion? It will take two pieces to solve this puzzle. The first is the naos. Amun's name is carved onto the surface. This proves it was part of Amun's temple. This is the second piece of the puzzle, a stone tablet written by the Greek conquerors. The words are in Greek and Egyptian, and one precious sentence mentions Amun's temple and the lost city of Heracleion.
In Greek, it says the city of Heracleion.
Yes?
In hieroglyph, it says the city where is the temple of Amun of the Gereb.
The Greek text mentions the city of Heracleion, and the Egyptian text mentions the temple of Amun and Gereb.
We are in the temple of Amun of the Gereb. Thus we were in the temple of the city of Heracleion.
It's an astounding discovery. The first evidence of Heracleon's temple, lost for over 2,000 years. And now, a chance to discover the city around it. The next clue comes quickly and amazes all who see it.
For me, the best moment of our excavation was the time where we discovered the stela. There has been a big cloud of mud and we could not see anything, and when the cloud disappeared, we saw it in front of us, absolutely intact with the inscription, and this was a fabulous instant.
The 14 rows of vertical hieroglyphs are in perfect condition. The figures at the top of the stela depict the great pharaoh Nectanebo I, who ruled from 380 to 362 BC, a generation before Alexander the Great's conquest of Egypt. Lifting the one-ton stela off the ocean floor is a delicate and time-consuming operation. Great care must be taken not to damage the heavy stone stela during its voyage from the ocean floor to the deck of the research vessel.
Little down. Coming around. Stay under the crane if you avoid it.
It's the first time the stela has seen the light of day in more than 1,000 years. Gaudio knows that the discovery will thrill Egyptologists all over the world. It is a priceless, unexpected window into the life of a lost city. A latex mold is made of the stela. Technicians will now be able to make perfect full-scale copies for further study. The hieroglyphs reveal the Egyptian name of the city the Greeks called Heracleion.
When they made one of these stela, they always carved the name of the city or site in which it was erected. Now, in your particular case, M. Niut Tahoniensis Ren, in the city whose name is Tahoniensis. So now we have three place names. We have Tahone, we have Heracleion, and we have the Temple of Amun and Gereb. And the confusion is resolved when you understand that Tahone and Heracleion are exactly the same city.
The original Egyptian name.
The stela also provides hints about the city that surrounded the Temple of Heracleion. The stela announces a tax on all foreign merchant ships which come down the Nile. It's a reminder that Heracleion was one of Egypt's largest ports before the Greek invasion.
East of the temple, we could see that there was several port basins, and we discover a port structure, very important port structure with jetty, moles, anti-wrecks, and anti-anchors.
From the largest slab to the smallest find, the location of each artifact is carefully recorded using GPS and logged into the computer survey. ancient shipwrecks, rich cargoes that once filled their holds. Stone anchors. The anchors are carefully plotted, and they reveal the course of a canal that surrounded the temple.
This was remarkable. We started to find one anchor, and we could not understand why one anchor in the middle of the land. Thus, we explore systematically this area here, and little by little we have discovered 261 antique anchors, which are more or less tracing the drawing of a canal linking the east port to the west lake over there.
Heraklion is coming into focus, a gigantic temple in a major port town, conquered but maintained by the Greeks. The invaders clearly decided not to fight the Egyptian religion, but to join it. This basin may have played a part in their strategy. It was probably used in a major festival for the great god Osiris.
We have discovered this monument of red granite in the temple. Every year, for the flooding of the Nile, a figure of Osiris was brought from the temple of Heraklion to the temple of Canopus in a procession on a solar barge.
Soon after the Greeks arrived, they proclaimed that Osiris would reside at Heraklion. It was from here that he was carried each year, a ritual Egyptians believe caused the flooding of the Nile.
This is known as an Osiris wheat mummy. It is a two-part mold, as you see here, and it is bandaged. And the texts tell us that a priestess would combine a special formula of Nile mud. She would then embed a number of these barley seeds. And the texts are very explicit because they say these images were then placed in a cult basin such as this.
The priest or priestess would then water the wheat mummy in order to cause the grain to sprout. This sprouting represented the revival of Osiris and the official start of the growing season. Found alongside the king and queen statues is the god Hapi, the ancient god of the flooding of the Nile. Hapi represented the power of fertility and nourishment. Placed on his offering table, the wealth and bounty of Egypt.
This is the only example that we have of a representation of Hapi on this scale. It clearly is Hapi. But what's interesting is that he's standing, he has a papyrus crown, and he's holding an offering table. And he's very, very unusual because we have no other colossal statues or images of Hapi. And he's probably shown here because the ruler wanted to link himself in with the god. Obviously, he's an appropriate god for the area, isn't he?
Yes, he's a god of the flood of the Nile. As a matter of fact, we found him underwater, that he has done a little bit too much of his job.
The god Hapi was thought to carry the dark bounty of the flooding river. Each year, it left behind the rich black silt that renewed the land. This was the marvelous source of Egypt's prosperity and gave the country its original name, Kemet, the Black Land. Each year, the flooding of the Nile was a time of celebration and feasting.
When one thinks of Heracleon, and when one thinks of the festivals that are described in the ancient authors, I think you have to be able to imagine a party town. Las Vegas on the Nile might not be a bad characterization.
Sin and salvation, it was all here at Heracleon. It was a time when the pharaohs came out from Alexandria to worship and relax.
At that particular time, the entire city must have been in festival. Everybody was having a good time because it was reaffirming the Nile bringing life again to Egypt and Osiris being resurrected to continue these cosmic cycles.
And there is a connection with the god Hapi, which was at the front of that temple.
Your statue of Hapi implies that association. The image of Osiris, created out of Nile mud, is resurrected when the plants sprout. And so the Hapi deity and your cultic basin found at Heracleon show that the two cults had an intersection, that they were almost in a sense equivalent. We can imagine thousands upon thousands of people coming out to celebrate this glorious rite of resurrection and renewal. And it confirms what the literary traditions tell us about the importance of Heracleon as a cult and religious center in that part of Egypt.
Heracleon's 2,000-year-old cloak of anonymity is slipping away. The legend is becoming reality. The glory of Heracleon, the temple city, is now finally being revealed. Its amazing statues and artifacts are helping Frank Gaudio to discover how the Greeks controlled Egypt for 300 years. It appears that their greatest allies were the temple priests, who controlled Egypt's ancient, mysterious religion.
The Ptolemies, although they were Greeks, were very, very keen to show themselves as pharaohs. And on this particular scale, this is quite a political statement for the king to be making. I mean, these are very, very large pieces. They're absolutely huge. But to have them in front of an Egyptian temple, that's quite a strong message that they're depicting. So what they're saying is that we may be Greeks, but we're also Egyptian pharaohs. And they're linking themselves to a traditional Egyptian deity. But it's also, I think, important for our knowledge of your site, because it may actually show a very close connection between the priests at this particular temple complex and the rulers in Alexandria, because the Ptolemies were being advised by local priests.
The Naus, discovered by Gaudio, also tells a story about the priests who inhabited the temple at Heracleon. These powerful high priests of Amun would have been among the most influential in the land. Priests who could make or break a monarch.
The Ptolemies and the ancient Egyptian priests had a very, very symbiotic relationship. The Ptolemies depended on the well-running of their administrative bureaucracy, and they needed the agrarian population, which was about 90% of the people living in the country, to back their regime. The only way they could do that was to enlist the aid of the priests, whom were the individuals that the native Egyptian population looked up to.
According to tradition, Alexander the Great was the first to legitimize his rule over Egypt by having the priests declare him the son of the god Amun. A Greek was now a true pharaoh. The relationship between the priests and the Ptolemaic rulers strengthened with time. This is among the largest stela ever discovered in Egypt. It once stood 20 feet high. Inscribed on one badly worn surface, the dim outline of Ptolemy VIII and his two queens. One was his own sister, Cleopatra II, the other, her daughter, Cleopatra III. This statement of solidarity on the stela masks an incestuous, murderous struggle for power.
Because it was as if the Ptolemies were saying, well, I may have some problems in the court at home by other members of the Ptolemaic dynasty, but at least I can rely on your support being the Egyptian priests, to make up for the defections that they were experiencing in the court itself.
While the royal family bickered and plotted against each other, the priests provided the illusion of a stable empire. The alliance was an old one. In 238 BC, Ptolemy III summoned priests from all over Egypt to celebrate his jubilee. But the festivities masked a court in turmoil.
During the second half of the Ptolemaic period, we have a lot of internecine battles. There's a lot of murders. The families are feuding amongst themselves. And the Ptolemies need a counterbalance, and they look now to the priests to provide them with that underpinning, let's say.
Parallel meetings in the suburb of Canopus between court officials and the clergy hammered out details of a state document known as the Canopus Decree. Inscribed on the decree, a story of political wheeling and dealing. The Greek ruler, Ptolemy III, was celebrated as a truly Egyptian pharaoh, and in return, the priests were amply rewarded.
There's a concession on the part of Ptolemy III to the priests when he says, I will increase the number of important priesthoods by 20%. So the priests saw that it was in their economic interest to underwrite the regime, just as the Ptolemies understood it was in their best interest to cooperate with the priests.
Silently, waiting, underwater, lies another Ptolemy, once worshipped by her subjects. This may be a depiction of Queen Cleopatra III, the great-grandmother of the famous Cleopatra. Thanks to the priests, the Greeks had the divine right to rule Egypt forever. Their temples and shrines were built to last for thousands of years. But this eternal reign was destroyed. Now, Gaudio wants to answer one last question. How did the mighty Heracleion fall into the sea? Under the waters of the Mediterranean, Frank Gaudio has found evidence of cataclysmic events that may have destroyed Heracleion. Dozens of ancient shipwrecks, unusual cracks in the ocean floor. Signs of a major cataclysm.
Frank, how do you account for the disappearance of Heracleion?
The land on which was built the temple collapsed. This could have been caused by an earthquake, catastrophic flooding of the Nile, a tidal wave, or maybe a combination of those elements all together. And this has happened maybe several times.
All around the foundation of the temple, Gaudio has found wooden pilings hammered into the ground. It seems the Egyptians knew the earth here wasn't solid enough to support heavy structures. These statues lie broken where they fell, untouched, preserved by a deadly flood. Among the tumbled walls, smaller reminders of a living, thriving city. The city where life suddenly ceased to exist.
We have several evidence of a catastrophic event. For example, we are finding gold jewelry, gold coins, plates of gold scattered in the area of the temple. You can expect that if there was not a catastrophic event, those objects would have been retrieved, of course, by the people there. We found also bones trapped under big construction block in the temple, which means that something happened catastrophic. %90 of the artifacts that we are discovering on that area of the temple dates back from before the Ptolemaic time and during the Ptolemaic time. The catastrophe of the temple must have occurred at the end of the 1st century BC or early 1st century AD.
2,000 years ago, the Ptolemaic dynasty was smashed by the Roman Empire. Cleopatra was the last queen. Strangely, Heraclion may have disappeared around the same time, as though the temple could not live without its Ptolemaic rulers.
You have a temple that is decorated in Egyptian style with 3 colossal statues never before known. And all of these elements are combining to say, oh, wait, let's time out, let's stop. The Ptolemaic period, which is traditionally described as an era of decline, decay, and degeneration, but as a result of your excavations, the second half of the dynasty needs to be re-examined. And I think that that discovery is going to force all of my colleagues working in this area to rewrite the history, particularly of the second half of the Ptolemaic period, indeed.
It's a treasure place, unbelievable. It's for an archaeologist, it's more than a life. You need more than a life to excavate all that. And this will be the base for future archaeologists to work for years and maybe centuries, who knows, on that site.